see the headlines about massive lawsuits and market monopolies, but we rarely see the actual mechanics of how they're being fought. This is EconWorks. We look past the talking points to find where law and economics actually collide and how those collisions redefine our world. Let's get into it.
In corporate law, finalizing a merger is like dropping ink into a glass of water. Once the ink disperses, operations integrate and employees combine. Separating the two companies again is treated as a physical impossibility. So when the prosthetics giant Otto Bock purchased a smaller rival named Freedom Innovations in 2017, the industry assumed the deal was permanent. Both companies manufactured microprocessor knees, or MPKs. These are highly advanced prosthetic joints packed with sensors and software that constantly adjust to a patient's gait. The paperwork was signed and the acquisition closed without public scrutiny. But months after the executives shook hands, the Federal Trade Commission intervened and ordered a halt to the integration. The FTC now faced a massive logistical and legal hurdle. They had to figure out how to pull that ink back out of the water and unscramble a completed corporate acquisition. This visual illustrates how the government monitors corporate buyouts through the Hart-Scott-Rodino, or HSR Act. When companies propose a merger, they must report it. If the transaction value is large enough, it hits a specific financial threshold, which you see represented here by the line. Large deals trigger an automatic review by regulators before they can close. However, the price Otto Bock paid for Freedom Innovations was relatively low. Because of that smaller price tag, the deal slips right underneath the notification threshold. It was legally non-notifiable. Without an initial review, the companies immediately began blending their operations. They combined their supply chains, shared intellectual property, and integrated their engineering teams. But bypassing the initial notification threshold does not grant permanent immunity. Regulatory agencies retain the authority to investigate and challenge a merger after the fact if they detect anti-competitive harm. To legally force a breakup, the FTC first had to prove Otto Bock was building an illegal monopoly. That required defining the exact boundaries of the market they were supposedly monopolizing. Otto Bock's legal team argued for a broad definition. They claimed their high-tech products competed directly with all prosthetic knees, including older, purely mechanical models. By this logic, the industry was crowded with alternatives, meaning their buyout of Freedom Innovations posed no threat to competition. The FTC countered with a narrow market definition. They argued that microprocessor knees were a completely distinct product category, effectively isolated from mechanical alternatives. To resolve this dispute, economists rely on a tool called the SSNIP test. This diagram traces what happens during a small but significant and non-transitory increase in price. It asks a simple question. If a monopolist raises the price of an MPK by roughly 5%, where do the buyers go? The data provided a clear answer. If an advanced robotic joint suddenly costs more, amputees and clinics do not downgrade to a standard hinge. Because buyers won't substitute one for the other, MPKs exist in their own isolated economic space. Confined to this specific category, the math changed entirely. Otto Bock and Freedom Innovations stood as each other's closest alternatives. Merging them directly eliminated head-to-head competition. While the SSNIP test focuses heavily on pricing, the government's investigation quickly zeroed in on a completely different metric: the potential loss of future technology. In the advanced prosthetics industry, companies constantly try to outpace each other by developing better sensors and lighter materials. Freedom Innovations had next-generation prototypes deep in their R&D pipeline. If the acquisition stood, Otto Bock would have the power to simply shelve those competing designs before they ever reached patients. Attempting to save the deal, Otto Bock invoked the failing firm offense. They presented accounting figures showing Freedom Innovations was losing money, arguing the smaller company would have collapsed without the buyout anyway. But the administrative judge rejected this interpretation. An analysis of the balance sheets revealed that Freedom wasn't actually failing. Their negative cash flow was the direct result of heavy, intentional investments in research and development, exactly the kind of aggressive competition the market requires. A company spending heavily to invent better products is not a failing firm. Protecting that specific drive to invent, what regulators call innovation competition, has become a central pillar of modern antitrust enforcement. The legal battle dragged on for over 3 years. After reviewing all the evidence regarding market definition and innovation pipelines, the FTC issued a rare final order, a mandatory structural remedy. Otto Bock was forced to meticulously separate the operations they had spent years integrating. They had to untangle shared supply chains, isolate intellectual property, and carve Freedom's assets back out of their own corporate structure. To restore the lost competition, the FTC ordered that Freedom's MPK business be transferred to a completely independent third-party buyer. In 2020, those assets, along with the underlying technology, were officially sold to a competitor named Protear. Freedom Innovations as a standalone corporate entity effectively ceased to exist. However, the next-generation prosthetic joints they had engineered survived and continued to push the market forward under new ownership. The Otto Bock case serves as a precise warning to the corporate sector. Even if a buyout slips past the initial financial thresholds and completely integrates into a parent company, regulatory agencies are willing to spend years and massive resources to pull the pieces back apart if the future of technological progress is at stake.
Thanks for watching. For the deep dive economic analysis behind these stories, join us at econworks.com. Subscribe to stay informed on where law and economics meet the market. We'll see you in the next episode.